Sometimes people report that they don't have motivation. They lack motivation, either to write at all or partway through the process. So they begin with a big burst of energy, inspiration, and motivation, but then it starts to flag as you really get into the work of this thing. It just becomes less fun, and you aren't don't have the momentum of being inspired initially, and so on. So whatever reason people can't find the motivation or have a hard time getting motivated, or they sort of start with that motivation but lose it at a certain point. So there are usually a few common things that happen with this and a few common ways to deal with it. So one really simple thing, of course, is if you are not motivated to write at all, I suppose the big question is like, why are you trying to write? I mean, nobody says you have to be a writer. If it's not important to you, I mean, I think it's a good thing to do, but that's me. It doesn't mean that you have to care about writing. So on one hand, like I've noticed, like there's a class of writers who just sort of have the idea that they need to be writers, but they don't actually like writing or anything about writing. They just, for some reason, got it in their head. So those people, you got two approaches, I guess. One, you could just quit doing it. I hate to tell writers to quit, but that's always an option. In fact, it's the easy option. In many ways, the problem is, even for writers who love it, how do you not quit? And I've said this in many other places, but like one of the biggest challenges of being a writer is that stopping yourself from quitting. So let's presuppose that you actually have good reasons and a real motivation to want to be a writer. But of course, I recognize, and you should recognize too, like there is no necessary reason anyone needs to be a writer. But I would argue that it would help you in almost every domain of your life to be a writer. So practically, I think recognizing the value of it is important in terms of keeping your motivation. And I would say, like, to start with that, you really should start your writing career and even start a project with the assumption that no matter how inspired and motivated you are right now, at some point you will no longer be motivated and inspired. That's just the reality of it. Writing is like digging a ditch. It's manual labor. And so there are great reasons to do it. And it is an honorable job. And there's an artistry that, can be developed. And I think it's important for, people and for society as a whole and so on. But the reason I can say things like that is because I keep reminding myself so I don't quit. And, the big thing that would help you the most is get a notebook, get a cue card, whatever it is. Spend some time right now just literally writing down why you want to be a writer and why you want to write. Because the days that you forget that, you can go look at the cue card. And it's that simple. You should literally sit down and write on a card, why do you want to be a writer? What is your motivation? Because the days you don't feel motivated, you need to just remember why you should be motivated, first off. So I think a lot of writers don't really think through that enough. A lot of writers don't really think through why they want to be writers. They just sort of have it in their heads. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it won't keep you motivated. What you need to keep motivated is you need to really pin down. You need to put some serious time and serious thought into why you want to be a writer. Why does it matter to you? Why does it matter to you in your life? And what are those motivations? And again, when you're down on it, either you lack confidence or you just aren't feeling it that day, you need to go back to the literal reasons that you literally wrote down as to why you want to be a writer and remind yourself. And then the other level of that is the project you're doing. Sometimes people aren't motivated to work on a particular project, even though they may have a lot of motivation to be a writer. But for whatever reason, the project they're working on isn't motivating them. So again, you need to maybe start with the idea of like, well, what is there a good reason to do this project at all, or should you quit? Maybe not quit being a writer, but maybe you need to quit that project. Maybe you need a better project. What is the reason you're doing this project? What's your motivation? Again, I would really encourage you to write it down. Write it down as you're beginning a project. When you really have that burst of inspiration and you really start to move with the momentum, take some time, just write it down. Like, why am I so excited about this, about being a writer or about this project? When you externalize and write down, record the actual motivations you have and the reasons you have for writing or for working on this particular story or poem or whatever, maybe you got a book project, whatever you're doing, I think you really need to record those motivations, explain why, like what's your big why. The business writer Michael Hyatt says, you lose your way when you lose your why. And I think there's a lot of truth in that idea. Just if you forget sort of why you're doing something, you'll go down these weird rabbit holes. And one of them could be like putting expectations on the project in terms of, how much money you think you're going to make, or how you think it's going to matter to your career. Is it going to get you an agent? All those things may be like motivating to you briefly, but they won't really have lasting motivation. These are all what we call extrinsic motivators. And what you need to really get at is, what are your intrinsic motivators? And what I mean by that is, what in and of itself is a motivating. So for me, I'm a full-time writer, okay? So one of my reasons to write is to make money. The problem with making money as a motivator is that there's lots of ways to make money. And in fact, there's easier ways to make money. So why keep writing if, yes, I got to make some money, but if I really just want to make money, why don't I just get work at McDonald's? I could probably earn just as much money over time, because the writing goes up and down. Like I'll have months where I make $20,000 and months where I make $100, right? Over a year, I make more money than I would make working at McDonald's, but a lot of writers don't. Most writers don't. Most writers would be better off working a minimum wage. That's just the reality of the economics of it. So I make much more money than that. But for the most part, I think the reason that I do better than that, the reason writing has been more lucrative for me than for other people, perhaps, I would argue, is because money isn't my motivator. Because if money was my motivator, I could always quit and do something else to make money. And I feel like, therefore, it can't be a real motivator. It could motivate you temporarily. You get an idea and you think, oh, I'm going to make $1 million with this idea. I mean, that's fine until you realize you're wrong, right? Or you just kind of like stop feeling like the market really would care about this idea anymore or whatever. It's fine, like, to get you excited maybe on one day or another day, but the reality is, like, that's not going to sustain you. What's going to sustain you is what we call intrinsic motivators. So extrinsic motivators would be things like, somebody's recognition, good reviews, people, thinking you're important, money, awards. Those are all extrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators are not good motivators. The psychological literature will tell us it doesn't keep people motivated, because even when people get them, they don't usually feel like it was what they expected. And when they don't get them, of course, they feel like they've wasted their time. Like they just take it to heart. When they get rejected, it really hurts them. When they thought they would get accepted and they were writing to get accepted, if you're working for acceptance or for money or for some extrinsic motivator, not only is it extremely damaging when you don't get that, but even when you do get it, it's usually dissatisfactory. And there's all sorts of other psychological reasons why that is. I won't get into them, but briefly, to kind of boil it down, what psychologists find, and what I think, you can just anecdotally also confirm, is that an intrinsic motivator is more compelling. So an intrinsic motivator would be something like, I just love writing. I love to sit down and to take that time for myself and, come up with ideas. It's just something that I think is fun. Having fun is an intrinsic motivator. I personally, I'm really motivated by wanting to develop my craft skills and wanting to be the best at something, or to really take something I have some skill at and improve those skills. And I'm motivated by seeing my skills improve. I'm very artistically motivated. I find I really love experimental, unusual, unconventional literature. It's just something I like to read. I like horror a lot, and so if I write something I want to write something that's really scary. If I write something that I recognize would be kind of very frightening, or even just funny, I'm proud of having done that. And whether you think it's funny or you think it's scary doesn't really matter to me so much, and that's usually the better motivator, is those kinds of intrinsic motivators. You just enjoy it, or you like seeing your skills build. You like seeing the pages pile up. And then fundamentally, what you need to do to sustain this motivation, once you kind of get the motivators figured out, like what does motivate you, what is your reason to write, the real pure, like intrinsic reasons. Once you figure those things out, what you need to do is find ways to systematically keep them front of mind. So one thing that I like to do, I like to see progress on a project. So progress on a project is something that really motivates me. The further I get, because I'll do book projects that take forever, it seems. So what I find is that what I'll do, one thing that keeps me motivated, is I'll record how many words I write, and I'll report that to my friend. Hey, I wrote 500 words today, I wrote 600 words today. I'll just text my friend this, and he doesn't even need to text me back. The point is, I'm just recording it and sending it out. I don't need the validation from him. I just want to be able to, I just need like a step to remind myself. But a simpler thing I do is I'll print the pages out. So, if I write a page or 2 pages or 3 pages that day, when I'm done writing, I'll print them out and I'll put them in a stack. And okay, well, now I can see the stack grow over time, right? And so that's motivating. That helps me keep the motivation, because I want to see the stack grow. Jerry Seinfeld used to report this calendar he had that he would put red X's on. If he wrote a joke, his goal was to write every day. And if he wrote that day, he would put an X on it. Didn't matter how much he wrote, whether 5 minutes, 500 minutes, he would just put a red X on the day if he wrote. And if he didn't write, he wouldn't put a red X on. And what he reports is eventually what you like seeing the red X's on the calendar, and that starts to become motivating. You don't want to break the chain. If you see a long string of X's, you don't want to miss a day because you don't want to have to not, leave a gap and start your X's again, right? That was motivating for him. He felt, like it was professional to write every day. He wanted to be a professional. That identity was important to him. And therefore, this idea in his head, well, professionals write every day, which you could argue with, but that was his idea. And so he would, put the calendar X on the calendars, and he could see if he was ever in doubt about whether or not he was a professional comedian, he could look at the calendar and he could see, well, I must be the real deal because I'm writing every day and I'm actually doing it. Some people, you got to figure out what's motivating to you, and how do you externalize that in a way that is going to help to maintain that momentum and that motivation. If you're a very visual person, maybe you want to put X's on a calendar. If you're a tactile person, maybe you want to, get a bunch of pennies and have a jar, and then, you're just every day you write 100 words, you put a penny in the jar. If you write 400 words, you put 4 pennies in the jar. And, as that jar fills up, you start to see and also just feel like the tactile feeling, like the weight of it, starts to kind of come into play now. You can pick the jar up and feel how much writing you did and feel that you're making progress, or whatever. But you need those intrinsic motivators. You need to record them. You need to be really clear on why this thing is important, because on the days when you don't feel like it's important, or the days you just feel like miserable and like it's everything you do is garbage, you have to remember, you have to literally remind yourself, it's not about being great from word one, and it's not about making a bunch of money or getting a thing published or accepted or whatever. It's about whatever it is motivating me day by day. For me, it's about doing the work and therefore being a writer. It's an identity thing for me. If I write, I am a writer, and I want to be a writer, so I need to keep writing. But at the same time, it's an artistry thing. I want to see my skills improve. I understand that they will only improve as I continue to write. And of course, I will see them improve as I continue to write. And then, of course, like I say, I want to make progress on a project and not just feel like I'm doing spinning my wheels and working interminably. It's very easy for it to feel that way when it's just on the computer screen, like everything's flat and, means nothing, right? When it's digital like that to me. So I need to print it out and have a stack of papers and see the stack get higher and so on. You may have something else that you need to find, but you need to find what works for you. And if the project itself, or just being a writer itself, just doesn't have an intrinsic motivator for you, there's different solutions. Either you can just keep working and keep doing it until you find what it is that you're really passionate about. Or, you could maybe switch projects and find one that's a bit more in line with your passions. A question like, am I doing this project because I think other people want me to do it? Or is there something better or more interesting that I really want to do that matters more to me? And maybe I should focus my efforts on, that project instead of the one that, I think maybe my mom, my dad, or my teacher, my friends might want to see me do. What do I want to do? What's the thing that is actually going to be motivating for me long term? Maybe not every day. Maybe some days I have to remind myself. I have to literally read the card where I wrote my motivations down. But for the most part, what are the things that are motivating to me about what I'm doing, about, who I am, about, my writing and being a writer?